Rumi was born in the year 1207 in the city of Balkh, a place that sits on the edge of the Great Desert of Central Asia. His father, Baha'u'llah Walid, was a respected scholar of law and a teacher of the Quran. The family moved when Rumi was still a child, first to the city of Samarkand and then to Konya, a bustling town in the Seljuk Empire that is now part of modern Turkey. Konya was a center of trade, of learning, and of many different peoples. The streets were filled with merchants, with travelers, and with scholars who gathered in the great mosque. In this lively setting, a young Rumi grew up surrounded by books, by prayer, and by the sounds of daily life. The city gave him a place to learn, to teach, and later to write the verses that would travel far beyond its walls. Rumi's mother, whose name is not recorded in the old histories, raised him with love and care. She taught him the simple habits of daily life, the way a child learns to tie a shoe or to share a meal. Rumi's early education was a mix of formal study and the everyday lessons of a household. He learned to read the Quran, to write Arabic, and to understand the law of the land. At the same time, he watched his father hold classes, listened to questions, and answered them with patience. Those scenes are like a child learning to ride a bike. The child must balance, must feel the wind, must trust the wheels. Rumi learned to balance the world of law and the world of love, and he kept that balance throughout his life. When Rumi reached his 30s, his father passed away, and the community asked him to take over the teaching position at the madrasa, the school attached to the great mosque of Konya. He accepted the role and began to guide students in the study of law and the Quran. He also started to write poetry, verses that sang of love, of longing, and of the hidden light inside every heart. His verses were simple enough for a farmer to hear, yet they carried a depth that scholars could explore. In this way, Rumi became both a teacher and a poet, a man who could speak in the language of the street and in the language of the soul. A turning point came in the year 1224, when a storm rolled across the plains of Anatolia. The storm was fierce, with wind that howled like a wild animal. In the midst of that storm, a traveller named Shams of Tabriz arrived in Konya. Shams was a wandering dervish, a seeker who lived without a home and who spoke in riddles. The storm forced Shams to seek shelter in the same caravanserai where Rumi was staying. The two men met under the roof of that crowded inn, and the meeting sparked a fire that would change both their lives. Shams saw in Rumi a deep yearning for truth, and Rumi saw in Shams a mirror that reflected his own hidden heart. Shams became Rumi's close companion, his teacher, and his friend. Their conversations were like a chef tasting a new spice. The chef adds a pinch, then watches how the flavor changes, then adds another pinch, learning with each bite. Rumi and Shams added ideas, stories, and questions to each other, tasting the spice of love and mystery. Shams challenged Rumi to move beyond the rules of law and to feel the pulse of the divine in everyday life. Rumi responded with verses that sang, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." That line, taken from his own poetry, shows how a painful moment can become a source of bright insight. The bond between them was not always calm. Some people in Konya, especially the scholars who knew Rumi as a respected teacher, felt uneasy about Shams' wild ways. They whispered that Shams was a troublemaker, that he threatened the order of the city. Rumi's own family worried that the friendship might lead him away from his duties. The tension grew until one night Shams vanished. Some say he was murdered by jealous rivals. Others say he left on purpose to test Rumi's love. The loss left Rumi in deep sorrow, but it also opened a new well of poetry. He wrote, "Out beyond ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I meet you there," a line that shows his belief that love can rise above all conflict. There are two main ways people talk about Rumi's life. One view holds that he was a pure mystic, a man who lived only for the love of the divine, and that every story about his life should be read as a symbol of inner truth. Supporters of this view point to his poetry, which often talks about the soul's dance with God, and they see his friendship with Shams as the ultimate example of spiritual union. The other view argues that Rumi was also a historical figure, a scholar, a teacher, and a community leader who worked within the political realities of the Seljuk Empire. Those who hold this viewpoint to records of his legal work, to his role as a judge, and to the fact that he received patronage from the local ruler, Sultan Kekba. They say that calling him only a mystic hides the fact that he also helped shape the law and the culture of his time. Both perspectives have merit, and together they give a fuller picture of a man who lived in both worlds. Rumi's family continued his work after his death. His son, Sultan Walid, was a devoted disciple who collected his father's verses and spread them across the land. Sultan Walid also wrote his own poetry, showing how the love for the divine can be passed from one generation to the next. The name Walad means son, and it reminds listeners that the teachings of Rumi were kept alive not just by strangers, but by his own blood. Sultan Walid travelled to many cities, reciting his father's verses in markets and in courts, and he helped to create the first organized order of the Mevlevi dervishes, the whirling order that still performs today. One of the most vivid stories about Rumi's funeral shows how his life turned into a celebration. When Rumi died in the year 1226, the city of Konya gathered to mourn. The funeral procession moved through the streets, and people expected a solemn march. Yet as the cortege passed the marketplace, the mourners began to sing verses of Rumi's own poetry. The chanting turned into a dance, and the crowd swayed like a field of wheat in the wind. The funeral became a celebration of love, a living reminder that Rumi's words had already turned grief into joy. That scene is remembered as a moment when sorrow and happiness merged, showing that his teachings were meant to be lived, not just read. Rumi's poetry did not stop at his own time. Later Sufi writers such as Hafiz of Shiraz, Ibn Arabi, and later mystics like Bulleh Shah in the Indian subcontinent all felt the echo of Rumi's verses. Hafiz wrote, "I have learned patience from the garden of love," a line that mirrors Rumi's theme of learning through love. Ibn Arabi, known as the greatest master, often quoted Rumi when he spoke about the unity of all being. In the modern era, poets like Coleman Barks have taken Rumi's Persian verses and rendered them into English, bringing the same simple, heartfelt language to new readers. The thread that runs from Rumi to these later writers is a belief that love is the true guide, that the heart can see what the mind cannot. A second everyday example helps to show how Rumi's life can be felt today. Imagine a child learning to ride a bike. At first, the child wobbles, falls, and feels fear. With each attempt, the child learns balance, feels the wind, and finally rides with confidence. Rumi's path was similar. He began with the rules of law, fell into the storm of love with Shams, felt the pain of loss, and finally rose to a place where his verses could glide like a bike on a smooth road. The child's joy at finally riding is like the joy listeners feel when they hear a line such as, "When you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving within you." Rumi's words also appear in the writings of later Mevlevi poets, who added their own verses to the whirling ceremonies. One such poet, Shah Abdul Qadir, wrote, "The heart that sings with love never knows the night." This line echoes Rumi's idea that love brings its own light, a thought that has travelled across centuries. The influence can be seen in music, in dance, and even in modern self-help books that quote Rumi without always giving the full story. Understanding the history behind the verses helps keep the original meaning alive. The city of Konya itself became a living monument to Rumi's life. The house where he was born was turned into a museum, and the tomb where he rests is visited by people from all over the world. Pilgrims walk through the garden, sit on the marble benches, and read his verses carved into stone. The garden is quiet in the early morning, and the air smells of rosemary and rose. Visitors often sit and think about the simple truth that Rumi taught, that love is the bridge between the human and the divine. Rumi's legacy also includes the practice of the whirling dance, known as the sema. The dance is a physical way to express the inner turning toward the divine. Dervishes spin in a circle, arms outstretched, as if they are drawing the world into a single point. The motion is calm, steady, like a child's breath when they finally ride a bike without fear. The dance shows how the body can become a tool for the soul's longing. It is a reminder that the teachings of Rumi are not only words on a page, but also actions that can be felt in the body. In the centuries after his death, scholars have tried to separate the myth from the man. Some argue that stories about Shams arriving in a storm are symbolic, meant to illustrate the sudden arrival of inspiration. Others point to historical records that note a caravan that was indeed delayed by a storm in that year, making the story plausible. The debate continues, and it adds a layer of depth to the way readers think about Rumi's life. Whether the storm was literal or metaphorical, the image of a powerful wind bringing a new teacher into a city helps people see how sudden change can spark growth. Another point of debate focuses on the way Rumi's poems were compiled. Some scholars say that many verses were added by later followers, that the collection known as the Govan grew over time. Others maintain that the core of the verses is truly Rumi's own voice, preserved by his son Sultan Walid. The discussion does not diminish the power of the poems. It simply shows how a community can protect and nurture a beloved teacher's words. The process of the story of Rumi's poetry begins in a small town on the edge of a desert, where a child named Jalal was born into a family of scholars. From the moment he learned to speak, he listened to the rhythm of prayer, the hum of the market, and the soft sigh of wind over sand. Those sounds became the first notes of a song that would later echo through centuries. The core of that song is love, loss, and the search for an inner light that never fades. Love in Rumi's verses is not limited to the romance of a lover's kiss. He writes, "The wound is the place where the light enters you. In simple terms, love is a doorway that lets the soul see a brighter world. A parent's love for a child shows this clearly. A mother watches her newborn sleep, feels the tiny heartbeat, and knows that love is a force that can move mountains." That same feeling appears in Rumi's lines about the divine. He says, "Love is the bridge between you and everything." The bridge is built from the same gentle care a parent feels, and it carries the heart across any distance. Loss, on the other hand, is often seen as only a sad event. Rumi, however, paints loss as a teacher. He writes, "When you are sorrowful, look at the sky and remember that clouds also move on." In a way, loss is like a traveller who has left home and feels the ache of distance. The traveller misses familiar streets, smells, and voices, yet that longing pushes the traveller to discover new lands. The ache becomes a compass that points toward growth. In Rumi's view, loss clears the way for the inner light to shine brighter. The inner light is the quiet flame that lives inside every person. Rumi calls it the thobev that lives in the heart. He says, "The lamp of the heart is lit by the breath of love. When a person feels love, that flame grows. When a person faces loss, the flame may flicker, but it does not go out. The flame can be fed by simple acts. A smile to a stranger, a prayer for a friend, or a moment of silence in a garden. In this way, the inner light is not a distant miracle, but a daily practice." Ibn Arabi, a mystic who lived a few centuries after Rumi, offers a contrast. Ibn Arabi calls love the wine that intoxicates the soul. He writes that the lover and the beloved become one, as if the cup and the wine are the same. Hafiz, A poet from the same era as Rumi takes a lighter tone. He says, "Even after all this time, the sun never says it is tired of rising." Hafiz's verses celebrate joy and the simple pleasure of a rose. While Rumi often speaks of love as a deep longing, Hafiz shows love as a playful dance. Both perspectives help the listener see the many faces of love. A common misunderstanding is that love in poetry is only about romance. Some listeners hear Rumi's lines about the beloved and think of a lover's embrace. The counterargument says, Rumi only writes about lovers meeting under moonlight. Yet Rumi's own words refute this. He says, "The lover is the one who sees God in every face." When a parent looks at a child, when a teacher watches a student learn, when a friend holds a hand in grief, all of those moments are love in Rumi's sense. The love he writes about is a universal force, not a single romance. Another counter-argument claims that loss is purely sad, a wound that never heals. Critics may point to verses that describe tears and say, Rumi glorifies suffering. Rumi, however, adds, "For the wound is the place where the light enters you." In this line, loss is a place where new sight appears. A broken pot may be glued back together, and the crack becomes a line of beauty. When a traveller finally returns home, the pain of missing the road becomes a memory that makes the reunion sweeter. Loss, then, is not only sad. It is also a chance to grow. A historical anecdote illustrates how a court poet reacted to a verse of Rumi. In the city of Konya, a nobleman invited poets to a banquet. When Rumi recited, "The garden of the heart blooms when the wind of love blows," the court poet, a man known for his sharp tongue, stood up and laughed. He said, "Your words are soft as a feather, but the world needs swords." The audience fell silent. Rumi smiled and replied, "A feather can still lift a kite high into the sky." The court poet, humbled, later wrote that the feather had indeed lifted his thoughts to new heights. This story shows how Rumi's gentle language could change a hardened mind. A second anecdote comes from a small village on the edge of a river. The villagers were preparing a wedding for a young couple. An elder recited a poem of Rumi that spoke of two rivers joining and becoming one. The bride's mother whispered, "May your love flow like these rivers, never stopping." The couple, hearing the verse, felt a deeper bond. They later told their children that the poem had taught them to see love as a steady flow, not a fleeting spark. The poem became part of the village wedding tradition, repeated at every celebration for generations. This shows how Rumi's words can live in everyday life. Modern self-help ideas often echo Rumi's themes. Many books talk about finding your inner light or turning pain into power. Rumi's line, "The wound is the place where the light enters you," matches the modern advice to see trauma as a chance to learn. Coaches tell people to practice gratitude, to see love in small acts. Rumi's verses about love as a bridge align with the idea that compassion builds stronger relationships. When a therapist asks a client to imagine a warm light inside, that image is a direct echo of Rumi's inner lamp. To bring these ideas home, imagine a parent who watches a child take the first steps. The parent feels a surge of love that fills the room. At the same time, the parent may feel a hint of loss, knowing that the child will soon walk away from the safety of the home. That mix of love and loss creates a bright inner light that guides the parent through each new stage. In Rumi's words, the parent is both lover and pilgrim, holding a candle that never goes out. Now picture a traveller who has been away for months. The traveller misses the smell of home-cooked food, the sound of familiar birds, and the comfort of a well-known street. The longing feels like a wound, but it also awakens a sense of wonder. When the traveller finally returns, the reunion feels like a sunrise after a long night. The traveller's heart, once dim, now glows with a new light. Rumi's poetry captures this moment when loss becomes a doorway to deeper love. An analogy can help clarify the search for inner light. Think of a garden at night. The garden is dark, but each flower holds a tiny firefly. When the fireflies gather, they create a gentle glow that lights the whole garden. Each firefly is a small act of love, a moment of gratitude, a memory of loss turned into growth. Together, they form the inner light that Rumi describes. The garden does not need a single big lantern. It needs many small lights working together. Another analogy compares love to a river. A river begins as a small spring, then gathers many streams, becoming wider and deeper. Along its path, the river may encounter rocks, creating rapids that seem dangerous. Yet those rapids also carve new valleys, making the landscape richer. In Rumi's view, love is the river that shapes the soul, smoothing rough edges and creating fertile ground for the inner light to grow. The ideas of Ibn Arabi and Hafiz help to broaden the picture. Ibn Arabi's notion of love as wine suggests that love can intoxicate the mind, making it see beyond ordinary limits. Hafiz's playful verses remind listeners that love can also be a simple smile shared over tea. Together, they show that love can be deep and light, serious and fun. Rumi's poetry sits in the middle, offering a balance that feels both profound and accessible. A third historical story tells of a Sufi master who asked his students to write a poem about love. One student wrote, "Love is a fire that burns the heart." The master smiled and said, "Fire can also warm the hands of a child on a cold night." He then quoted Rumi, "When the soul is thirsty, the heart becomes a well." The master's lesson was that love can be both a flame that consumes and a well that gives. The students learned to see love in many forms, just as Rumi taught. A fourth anecdote comes from a market in the city of Shiraz. A merchant heard a traveller recite a line from Hafiz about the rose and the night. The merchant, who dealt in spices, responded with a Rumi verse about the spice of love that flavors the soul. The two strangers laughed and shared tea, realizing that poetry could turn a simple transaction into a moment of connection. This story shows how Rumi's words can turn everyday encounters into opportunities for love. The theme of loss also appears in everyday life. A farmer who loses a crop may feel deep sorrow. Yet the farmer can also see the loss as a chance to plant a new seed, to try a different method, to learn from the soil. Rumi's line, "When the heart is broken, the world opens its doors," speaks to that hope. The farmer's loss becomes a doorway to new growth, just as a broken heart can open the mind to deeper understanding. Modern psychology often uses the term post-traumatic growth to describe how people become stronger after a painful event. Rumi's poetry predates that term by centuries, yet it says the same thing. He writes, "The night is dark, but the moon still shines." The moon is the inner light that remains even when the world feels heavy. In self-help workshops, participants are asked to imagine that moon, to hold it in their mind, and to let its calm guide them. The practice mirrors Rumi's simple yet powerful image. When Rumi speaks of the inner light, he does not ask for a grand revelation. He asks for a quiet moment. He says, "Close your eyes and listen to the silence. There you will find the lamp." A child can sit on a porch, watch the sunset, and feel a warm glow inside. That glow is the same as the lamp Rumi mentions. It does not need a complex ritual. It needs only attention. A final example ties together love, loss, and inner light in a modern setting. A therapist works with a client who feels isolated after moving to a new city. The therapist asks the client to write a short poem about the feeling of missing home. The client writes, "I carry the scent of my mother's kitchen in my pocket." The therapist then shares a Rumi verse. "Your heart is a garden. The scent you carry is a seed that will bloom here. The client begins to see that the love for home is not a loss, but a seed that can grow a new garden. The inner light, in this case, is the hope that love can travel with the person. In sum, Rumi's core themes are not abstract ideas locked in a dusty book. They are living experiences that can be felt in a parent's hug, a traveler's sigh, a wedding song, or a quiet moment of prayer. Ibn Arabi and Hafiz provide contrasting colors that make the picture richer. Counterarguments that limit love to romance or loss to sadness are answered by simple verses that show love as a bridge, loss as a teacher, and the inner light as a lamp that never goes out. Historical anecdotes from courts and villages prove that Rumi's words have moved people for centuries. Modern self-help ideas echo his insights, proving that the wisdom of Rumi still guides seekers today. By listening to the soft rhythm of his poetry, anyone can learn to love deeper, see loss as a chance to grow, and keep the inner light bright, no matter how dark the night may seem. The story of Rumi's use of metaphor and symbol begins in a small town of Konya, where the poet-mystic lived in the 13th century. In that time, the world was full of gardens, mirrors, and rivers. Those objects were not only useful tools, they also carried deep meaning for people who sought a hidden truth. Rumi took those everyday objects and turned them into doors that lead the heart toward the divine. He wrote in Persian, but the ideas travel across languages and cultures. The garden, the mirror, and the river appear again and again in his verses. Each symbol works like a simple picture that invites the reader to look deeper. The garden first appears in Rumi's poems as a place of growth and fragrance. He writes, "For the garden of the heart is a garden of love, where each flower is a breath of the beloved." In that line, the garden is not a piece of land. It is a picture of the inner self. The garden grows when the soul is fed with prayer, with kindness, with music. When the garden is neglected, weeds appear. The image is easy to see. A child can picture a garden with bright roses and green leaves. The child can also feel how the garden changes when water is given or when the sun shines. Rumi uses that simple picture to talk about spiritual growth. The mirror is another favorite symbol. Rumi says, "Mirror of the heart reflects the face of the beloved, if the dust is cleared." The mirror is a piece of glass that shows a face. In a kitchen, a mirror shows a person's face as they brush their teeth or tie a knot. In Rumi's words, the mirror shows the divine face when the heart is clean. The mirror can also be cracked. A cracked mirror gives a broken picture. Rumi writes, "When the mirror is broken, the light scatters, and the soul sees many pieces of truth." The mirror is a way to talk about self-knowledge and humility. The river flows in many of Rumi's verses. He writes, "Well, the river of love carries the leaf of the seeker downstream to the sea of unity." A river is a moving water that can be seen in any town. A river can be calm or fast. It can carry leaves, sticks, and small boats. In the poem, the leaf is a soul that drifts on the current of love. The leaf does not fight the flow. It simply moves with the water. The river shows how the seeker can let go of control and trust the flow of life. These three symbols are not random. They belong to a long tradition of mystic language. The Sufi master Al-Ghazali, who lived a few centuries before Rumi, also used garden and mirror images. Al-Ghazali wrote, "The heart is a garden that must be tended, and a mirror that must be polished." He used the same pictures to teach that the heart needs care. By comparing Rumi with Al-Ghazali, one can see how the garden, mirror, and river became a shared language for seekers. The language is simple, but the meaning can be deep. The garden symbol also appears in Western poetry. William Wordsworth wrote about a garden as a place where memory grows. He said, The garden holds the echo of the past and the scent of the present. The picture is similar to Rumi's garden. Emily Dickinson used the river as a symbol of time. She wrote, "Will the river runs and carries all that lives away toward the sea." The river in Dickinson's poem is like the river in Rumi's verses. Both poets use the same simple objects to talk about the flow of life. To see how these symbols work in daily life, imagine a kitchen mirror. A person stands in front of the mirror while washing a dish. The mirror shows a face that is wet with drops of water. The face looks tired, but also bright. In that moment, the mirror tells the person that the outside skin can be cleaned, but the inner self also needs cleaning. If the person wipes the mirror clean, the reflection becomes clear. That small act mirrors Rumi's idea that the heart must be polished to see the divine. Another everyday picture is a river carrying leaves downstream. A child watches leaves float on a stream. The leaves do not try to swim upstream. They simply let the water move them. The child learns that sometimes the best way to move is to go with the flow. Rumi's river symbol tells the seeker to let love move the heart, instead of fighting against it. The leaf does not know the destination, yet it arrives at the sea. The same is true for a soul that trusts the current of love. Rumi's symbols are not without critics. Some argue that symbols are too vague. They say a garden can mean many things. A garden of pleasure, a garden of sin, a garden of politics. When a word can hold many ideas, the message may become unclear. A second criticism says that symbols can limit personal meaning. If a poet tells a reader that a mirror must mean the heart, the reader may feel forced to see only that meaning. The reader may miss a different picture that speaks to their own life. These objections are important to consider. In response to the first objection, Rumi often adds a line that guides the reader. He writes, "The garden is not only a place of flowers, but also a place of thorns, and the thorns teach patience." By adding the thorns, Rumi shows that the garden can hold many parts. The symbol stays simple, yet it can hold many layers. The second objection is met by the way Rumi invites each listener to bring their own experience. He says, "When you look at the mirror, see your own face, not the face I gave you." In that line, he opens the symbol to personal interpretation. The symbols become a shared space where many voices can speak. A real-world example of the garden symbol appears in a Sufi gathering that took place in a caravanserai near Konya. The group sat on the floor, surrounded by a small garden of herbs. The master of the gathering asked, "What does this garden tell us about the path?" One disciple answered, "The herbs grow when we water them, like the heart grows when we pray." Another replied, "The weeds that appear are our doubts, and we must pull them out." The master smiled and said, "The garden is a mirror of the inner world. It shows us what we need to tend." The story shows how the garden symbol was used in a live setting to guide a group of seekers. A second anecdote tells of a merchant who dreamed of a broken mirror. The merchant woke up in the early morning, worried that the dream meant bad luck. He went to a Sufi teacher for help. The teacher listened and said, "A broken mirror shows many fragments of light. Each fragment can reflect a part of the truth." The teacher then asked the merchant to collect the pieces and arrange them on a table. When the merchant did so, he saw his own face in each shard. He realized that his life was made of many parts: work, family, faith, and love. The broken mirror taught him to see the whole self, not just a single image. This story shows how the mirror symbol can turn a fear into a lesson. Modern readers still find the garden, mirror, and river useful. A therapist may ask a client to imagine a garden of thoughts. The client can then see which thoughts are healthy flowers and which are choking weeds. A mindfulness teacher may ask students to picture a river of breath, letting each inhale and exhale flow like water. The teacher may also ask students to look at a mirror of emotions, noticing how feelings reflect the inner state. In each case, the simple symbol becomes a tool for growth. In contemporary poetry, the garden appears in the work of Mary Oliver. She writes that the garden is a place where the world pauses and the heart listens. The mirror shows up in the poems of Rainer Maria Rilke, who says, "The mirror does not lie, it only shows what we bring to it." The river is a common image in the songs of Bob Dylan, who sings, "The river rolls on, carrying the stories of the road." These modern uses echo Rumi's ancient images, proving that the symbols travel across time. Rumi also used the symbols to talk about love. He wrote, "Love is the garden where the soul plants its seed, and the mirror that shows the lover's face, and the river that carries the heart to the sea." The line ties the three images together. Love becomes a place of growth, a clear surface, and a moving current. The combination helps a reader feel the many ways love works. Al-Ghazali's view of symbols differs slightly. He emphasized that symbols must point directly to God, and that the seeker must not get lost in imagination. He warned that the garden of the heart can become a desert if the seeker forgets the source of water. Rumi, on the other hand, allowed more play. He said, "Well, the garden can be a garden of wine, a garden of tears, a garden of laughter." Rumi's tone is more open, inviting the reader to explore many shades. The comparison shows how two great thinkers used the same pictures in different ways. A counter-argument that symbols limit personal meaning can be illustrated with a modern reader who feels that the river always means death. The reader may say, "Every time I see a river, I think of loss because my father died near a river." For that person, the river is a painful sign, not a hopeful one. Rumi's verses, however, also speak of the river as a path to reunion. By offering many lines about the river, Rumi gives space for the reader to choose a new meaning. The symbol does not force a single view, it offers a field of possibilities. Another criticism says that symbols can be too vague for academic study. Scholars may argue that garden could refer to a literal garden in Konya, or a metaphor for the world, or a symbol of the afterlife. To address this, scholars look at the context of each poem. When Rumi writes, "The garden of the night blooms with stars," the night garden is clearly a picture of the sky. When he writes, "The garden of the heart opens with prayer," the garden is an inner space. By reading the surrounding lines, the meaning becomes clearer. The symbols are simple, but the surrounding words guide the reader. Real-world applications also appear in education. A teacher may ask students to draw a garden that shows their hopes. The students then discuss which plants they chose and why. The activity helps them talk about goals. In a corporate setting, a leader may use the story of Rumi and his love for music and dance begins in a small town called Balkh, where the poet was born in 1207. From the start, the world around him was full of sound. The call to prayer rose from the mosque. The market sellers sang as they sold spices, and children ran through the streets, clapping to the beat of a drum. In that lively setting, a young man learned that rhythm could hold a kind of hidden truth. He grew up to become a mystic, a teacher, and a poet whose words still travel across time. Rumi's teacher, Shams of Tabriz, showed him that the heart can speak louder than the mind. Shams would often play a reed flute while walking in the garden. He would say that the music is a bridge between the soul and the divine. Rumi listened, and he felt a new kind of prayer rise inside him. He began to write verses that sang of love, of longing, and of the dance that joins the two. In one famous line he wrote, "When you let go of yourself, you become free." The idea was simple. When the self steps aside, the spirit can move like a bird in the wind. The practice of moving in a circle to find that freedom took shape as the whirling dervishes, known as the semah. The word semah means listening in Persian. The dervishes spin in long white skirts, their arms lifted like a bird about to take flight. The spin is not a random twirl. It follows a precise pattern that matches the breath, the heartbeat, and the rhythm of a drum that beats in the background. The spin helps the dancer turn the inner turmoil into a calm center. As the body rotates, the mind can quiet down and the heart can open. One early writer who described this practice was the Persian mystic Attar. In his poem, The Conference of the Birds, Attar tells a story of birds that fly together to find a king. He writes, "The wind lifts the feather lifts the wind." The line shows how movement and spirit lift each other. Attar's words helped shape how later followers understood the whirling. He said that the dance is a way to see the hidden kingdom inside. Attar's ideas spread through the Sufi orders, and the whirling became a regular part of the gatherings that Rumi's followers held. The music that surrounds the whirling is also important. A small group of musicians called the naina players, the drum makers, and the singers all join the circle. The ni is a long flute made of reed. Its sound is soft, like a sigh, but it can also rise to a high note that sounds like a cry. The drum, called the daf, gives a steady beat that the dervishes follow. The singers chant verses from Rumi's poems. One verse that often rings out is, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." The singers repeat the line while the dervishes spin, letting the words settle into the heart. Modern musicians have taken these verses and turned them into songs that play on radios and in concert halls. The Iranian band Niyaz mixes electronic beats with the old poetry of Rumi. Their song, The Veil, uses a loop of a ni and a soft drum, while a voice sings Rumi's line about love being a fire that burns without smoke. The Canadian singer Lorena McKennitt recorded The Mystic's Dream, a track that uses a harp and a choir to sing Rumi's words about the heart's longing. Even pop artists have sampled Rumi's verses. In a recent album, a famous rapper used the line, "When you let go of yourself, you become free," as a hook, turning a centuries-old thought into a modern anthem. These musicians show that the spirit of Rumi's music still moves people today. To see how the ideas work in everyday life, imagine a child clapping to a beat. The child does not think about the rhythm. The child simply feels the pulse and lets the hands move. In that moment, the child is fully present, fully aware of the sound, and fully alive. The child's clapping is a tiny version of the whirling dervish. Both use the body to feel the music and to stay in the moment. Now picture a couple dancing at a party. The music is loud, the lights flash, and the couple moves together. They do not count steps or worry about the next song. They simply follow the beat, letting their bodies speak the words they cannot say. In that dance, they share a feeling of connection that goes beyond words. The couple's dance mirrors the semah, where each turn is a step toward a deeper bond with the divine and with each other. There are people who argue that movement can pull the mind away from deep thought. They say that a dancer's mind is busy with steps, not with quiet reflection. This view holds that true contemplation needs stillness, not spin. Another argument comes from those who see music as only entertainment. They claim that a song is meant to make people happy, not to open a spiritual door. These points are worth hearing. The first counter-argument, that movement distracts from thought, can be answered by looking at the way the whirling dervish uses breath and focus. When the dervish spins, the breath is counted with each turn. The mind follows the breath, and the breath follows the music. The movement becomes a tool, not a distraction. The second counter-argument, that music is only entertainment, meets a response in the way the Semar uses music as a prayer. The singers do not just sing for fun. They chant verses that point to love, to loss, to the search for truth. The music becomes a language that carries the same weight as a spoken prayer. A story from the 13th century shows how the Semar can calm a heated situation. In a town near Konya, two rival families were about to start a fight over a market stall. The tension grew, and swords were drawn. At the last moment, a group of dervishes entered the square, set up a drum, and began to spin. The beat of the daf rose, and the dervishes turned in a slow, steady circle. The crowd watched, then began to clap along with the rhythm. The music and the movement softened the anger. By the time the drum stopped, the two families had lowered their swords and shared a laugh. The night of Semar turned a possible battle into a moment of peace. Another anecdote comes from a market vendor named Hassan who sold figs in the bazaar of Samarkand. One hot afternoon, a traveller stopped by, looking tired and worried. Hassan began to hum a line from Rumi. "The garden of the heart is a garden of roses, but the thorns are also there." He sang the line while arranging the figs. The traveller listened, felt the calm in the voice, and bought a handful of figs. He left with a smile and a lighter heart. Hassan's simple humming turned a routine sale into a moment of shared humanity. These stories show how music and dance can change the tone of a place. They also show how the ideas of Rumi still work in modern life. Today, many people practice mindfulness, a way of paying attention to the present moment. The whirling dervish is a form of moving mindfulness. In a mindfulness class, a teacher might ask students to walk slowly, feeling each footstep, listening to the breath. The dervish does the same, but with a spin. The beat of the drum acts like a guide, like a metronome for the mind. When the mind follows the beat, thoughts settle, and the heart can open. In contemporary therapy, music is used to help patients with anxiety. A therapist may play a soft knee while a patient breathes. The patient learns to match the breath to the music, similar to how a dervish matches spin to the drum. This practice lowers stress and brings a sense of calm. In schools, teachers sometimes use clapping games to help children focus. The child clapping to a beat learns to stay in the moment, just as the adult dancer learns to stay present in the circle. Modern thinkers have written about this link between movement and mind. A psychologist named Dr. Maya Patel wrote a paper that called the whirling sigh kinetic meditation. She explained that the rotation creates a feeling of loss of self, which she said is similar to what happens in deep meditation. She quoted Rumi, "When the soul lies down in that grass, the world becomes a garden." Patel argued that the garden is the mind when it is free from ego. Her work shows how ancient practice can be understood with modern science. Another modern voice comes from the musician and composer Anushka Shankar. She said in an interview, "The sound of the sitar is a prayer, and the rhythm of the tabla is a heartbeat. When I play, I feel like I am joining a circle that began with Rumi." Her words echo the idea that music is a bridge between the inner world and the outer world. The role of song in Rumi's teachings also appears in his own poetry. In a famous verse he writes, "The song of love is a bird that never rests." The line tells the reader that love, like a song, moves constantly. When a singer repeats the line, the listener feels the motion of love in their chest. Rumi also wrote, "Listen with your heart, not with your ears." This line tells the seeker that true listening is not just hearing the sound, but feeling the meaning. The whirling dervish listens with the heart as the body spins. Rumi's teachings also talk about the power of silence. He said, "Silence." He said, "Silence is the language of God." The silence that follows a song is like a pause between breaths. In the Sema, After a song ends, there is a moment of quiet before the next drum beat. That quiet gives the mind a chance to settle, to feel the echo of the words. The alternation of sound and silence is a rhythm that teaches the mind to rest and to rise. The modern practice of yoga often includes chanting, known as Rumi mantra. The chanting is similar to the singing of Rumi's verses. A mantra repeats a phrase, and the breath follows the sound. In both cases, the sound becomes a guide for the mind. The difference is that in the sema, the body also moves in a circle. The circle is a symbol of wholeness, a shape that has no beginning and no end. When a dancer spins, the shape of the motion mirrors the shape of a circle, showing that the seeker is part of a larger whole. A simple analogy can help explain why the spin works. Imagine a child on a merry-go-round. As the child spins, the world blurs, and the child feels a mix of excitement and calm. The child is not thinking about school or chores. The child is just feeling the motion. The mind quiets because the body is busy with the spin. The whirling dervish uses the same principle, but with a purpose: to let the heart see the light that Rumi wrote about. Another analogy comes from a kitchen. When a pot of soup is stirred, the ingredients mix together, and the flavors become one. If the pot is not stirred, the flavors stay separate. The whirling dervish stirs the heart, mixing the love for the world with the love for the divine, creating a single taste. The music is the heat that helps the mixing happen. The story of the night when the Sema stopped a conflict also shows how music can change the mood of a whole crowd. In that town, the two families were ready to fight over a piece of land. The dervishes entered, placed a drum in the center, and began to spin. The beat rose, and the crowd felt the rhythm in their bones. The tension melted like ice in the sun. By the time the drum stopped, the families were laughing, sharing tea, and talking about the next harvest. The music and the movement turned anger into friendship. The market vendor humming a verse shows that even a small act of singing can lift a heart. The vendor did not plan to be a teacher, but his simple humming turned a transaction into a moment of connection. The traveler left with more than figs. He left with a feeling of peace. This shows that music can be a quiet prayer, even when it sounds like a simple tune. In today's world, many people practice mindfulness with apps that play soft music while the user breathes. The apps often use a slow drum beat or A. Rumi lived in a time when religious leaders held great power over the lives of ordinary people. In the bustling streets of Konya, the sound of prayer calls mixed with the chatter of market stalls. Yet Rumi often spoke in a way that made people question why a single person could claim to know the whole truth. He believed that true guidance comes from the heart, not from a title or a throne. Rumi's challenge to formal religious leaders can be traced back to the early Islamic tradition of Sufi mysticism. Sufis saw the divine as a living presence that could be felt inside each person. In this view, a scholar who only repeated verses without inner feeling was like a lamp without oil, Rumi wrote. The lamp of the heart must be lit from within, not from the fire of another. This simple line shows his belief that spiritual authority must arise from personal experience. Al-Farabi, a philosopher who lived a few centuries before Rumi, also thought about the role of leaders. Al-Farabi described a virtuous city where rulers guide people toward truth. He argued that a wise ruler can keep society stable. Rumi respected Al-Farabi's search for wisdom, but he also saw a danger. Rumi warned that a ruler who claims to hold all truth can close the doors to inner light. He wrote, "When the heart is locked, no key can open it." In this way, Rumi's words echo a gentle protest against the idea that one person can hold the whole spiritual map. Modern critics of organized faith pick up Rumi's thread. Some scholars say that institutions can become too rigid, turning faith into a set of rules rather than a living feeling. Others argue that without some structure, belief can drift into chaos. These two sides form the backdrop for Rumi's own story. Imagine a student in a modern classroom. The teacher explains a rule that seems unfair. The student raises a hand and asks, "Why do we have to follow this rule if it does not help us learn?" The teacher may smile or may shut the question down. Rumi's teaching would side with the student's curiosity. He would say that true learning comes when the mind asks, why, and not just what. In his own life, Rumi asked the same question of the scholars who told him what to pray and how to act. He answered with poetry that invited people to look inside themselves. Now picture a teenager standing at a crossroads, choosing between a career in medicine or a path in art. The teenager hears parents and teachers say that medicine is safe, respectable, and useful. Yet the teenager feels a pull toward painting, toward expressing feelings on a canvas. Rumi would tell the teenager that the inner voice is a compass. He wrote, "When you let go of who you think you are, you become who you truly are." The teenager's dilemma mirrors the larger question of who gets to decide what is right for a soul. Rumi's view says that the soul itself should have the final say, not a distant authority. Rumi's own life offers two vivid anecdotes that show his stance. The first involves a local imam who invited Rumi to discuss a theological point. The imam was known for his strict interpretation of law. He asked Rumi to explain a verse that seemed to limit love to the divine alone. Rumi replied with a story of a lover who could not stop thinking of his beloved, even though the lover was a simple gardener. He said, "Love is a river that does not ask for permission to flow." The imam, surprised by the poetic answer, fell silent. This story spread through the town and reminded people that spiritual truth can be spoken in simple, loving terms, not only in legal language. The second anecdote comes from a ruler who loved poetry. The ruler sent a messenger to Rumi, asking him to read at the royal court. Rumi accepted, but he arrived with a single reed flute and a handful of verses. He began by saying, "I am a humble reed, bent by the wind of the divine." The ruler, expecting a formal sermon, was moved by the gentle honesty. He later wrote in his diary, "Rumi's words cut through the armor of my power and touched the simple heart within." This meeting showed that even a king could be humbled by a poet who trusted his own inner voice more than any official doctrine. These two stories illustrate how Rumi's ideas worked in real life. They also show that his challenge was not a call for rebellion without purpose. Rumi believed that inner guidance could keep society calm, just as a well-tuned instrument can keep a song in harmony. He never said that order is useless. Instead, he suggested that order should arise from love, not fear. To understand the full picture, it helps to look at two common counter-arguments. The first says that authority is needed to keep order. Without a clear guide, people might act on whims, causing conflict. In a city, traffic lights, laws, and teachers keep the flow smooth. This view holds that a leader who knows the rules can protect the community from chaos. Rumi did not deny the need for rules, but he warned that rules become harmful when they are used to control the heart. He wrote, "A chain that binds the body while the spirit roams free is a false safety." In this way, Rumi's words suggest that a rule that does not allow love will eventually break. The second counterargument claims that rebellion can lead to chaos. If everyone follows their own feeling, there is a risk that selfish desires will clash. History shows that revolts can turn violent. This argument says that some level of obedience keeps the group safe. Rumi answered this by pointing to the power of compassion. He said, "When the heart is full of love, it does not seek to dominate but to share. If each person lets love guide their actions, the fear of chaos fades." In Rumi's view, the true rebellion is not against order, but against the idea that order must be built on fear. Real-world applications of Rumi's view can be seen in modern spiritual communities. Many groups meet in circles, sharing poems and music without a single leader. They decide together how to pray or meditate. This practice reflects Rumi's belief that the group can find direction when each heart is open. In schools, teachers who encourage students to ask why create a learning environment that feels safe yet free. In workplaces, managers who listen to employees' inner motivations often see higher morale. These examples show that Rumi's ideas still have a place in everyday life. Modern interpretations of Rumi's challenge to authority also appear in popular culture. Some writers compare Rumi's poetry to the idea of inner authority found in modern self-help books. They argue that the modern coach replaces the old religious leader, but the coach still tells people what to do. Rumi would likely ask, who is the coach if the heart already knows the path? Some scholars, such as the contemporary Sufi writer Kabir Helminski, say that Rumi's message is a call to balance. They write that Rumi does not reject all forms of guidance, but he asks that guidance come from love, not from power. Linking to contemporary debates, many people today argue about the role of organized faith in public life. Some say that churches, mosques, and temples should have a voice in politics because they hold moral wisdom. Others claim that religion should stay out of lawmaking to protect freedom. Rumi's words offer a quiet middle ground. He reminds listeners that true wisdom lives inside each person. He says, when the heart is clear, it does not need a throne to rule. This line can be used by both sides. Those who fear too much power can point to the need for inner clarity, while those who fear loss of moral guidance can point to the need for personal responsibility. A simple analogy can help. Think of a garden. A gardener can plant seeds, water them, and protect them from pests. The gardener's role is important, but the plants also need sunlight. If the gardener blocks the sun, the garden dies, no matter how well he waters. In Rumi's view, the religious leader is the gardener, but the inner light is the sun. The garden grows best when both work together, not when the gardener tries to become the sun. Another analogy compares authority to a lighthouse. A lighthouse warns ships of rocks, but the ship's captain still decides which way to steer. If the captain follows the light blindly without looking at the sea, the ship may still crash. Rumi would say that the lighthouse can guide, but the captain must also listen to the wind and the stars. This image shows that guidance is useful, but it must be balanced with inner sense. Historical anecdotes further illustrate Rumi's stance. In one story, a group of merchants asked Rumi to bless their trade caravan. They expected a formal prayer that would protect them from thieves. Rumi smiled and said, "The true protection is not a word, but a heart that does not cling to fear." He gave them a simple poem about trust and love. The merchants reported that their journey was safe, not because of a spell, but because they traveled with calm minds. This tale spread and taught that inner peace can be a shield. In another tale, a powerful vizier invited Rumi to join a council that would decide on new laws for the city. The vizier hoped Rumi's fame would lend credibility to the council's decisions. Rumi attended, but when asked to endorse a law that would punish dissent, he replied, law that punishes the seeker of truth is a cage for the soul." He refused to sign the document. The vizier was angry, but many citizens admired Rumi's courage. This incident showed that standing up to authority can inspire change, even if it brings personal risk. Quotes from Rumi's own writings add depth to the discussion. He said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." This line suggests that pain can open a person to deeper insight, a point that supports his view that questioning authority can lead to growth. He also wrote, "Do not be satisfied with the stories that come before you. Unfold your own myth. This encourages each person to write their own spiritual story, rather than copying the old tales handed down by leaders. Finally, he said, "Out beyond ideas of right and wrong there is a field. I will meet you there." This invites listeners to step beyond the strict labels set by institutions and find a shared space of love. When the modern world looks at organized faith, many people feel torn. Some feel safe in the rituals of a church or mosque. Others feel trapped by the same rituals. Rumi's voice offers a gentle reminder that safety and freedom can live together when the heart stays open. He does not call for the destruction of all structures, but he asks that each structure be checked by love. He writes, "When the heart is pure, no ruler can claim ownership over it." This line can be heard in classrooms, in boardrooms, and in homes where people discuss values. In practice, a teacher who follows Rumi's idea might ask students to write about a time they felt a deep connection to something beyond the textbook. The teacher would not force a single answer, but would listen to each story. A teenager who faces the pressure to choose a career might read Rumi's poetry and find a phrase that says, "Follow the music inside you." That phrase can give the teen confidence to follow a path that feels true, even if others doubt it. Critics of Rumi's view sometimes point out that not everyone has the same ability to hear the inner voice. They argue that some people need clear. Rumi's name still rings in many rooms where words are shared. The story of his influence begins in the 13th century, when a Sufi mystic in Konya wrote verses that sang of love, loss, and the search for truth. Those verses traveled on the backs of traders, on the pages of travelers, and later on the tongues of poets who found a new way to speak about the heart. One of the first people to notice the power of Rumi's words was a German scholar named Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Goethe read a translation of the Masnavi, the long poem that Rumi called the spiritual school. He wrote, "In Rumi's verses I hear a voice that calls me to the inner garden of my soul." Goethe's notes spread among European writers who began to see Rumi as a bridge between East and West. In the early 1900s, a Lebanese poet named Khalil Gibran read Rumi's verses in Arabic. Gibran later said, "Rumi taught me the language of love that has no borders." Gibran's own work, especially The Prophet, carries a rhythm and a sense of unity that echo Rumi's style. The way Gibran blends the everyday with the divine mirrors the way Rumi turns a simple cup of tea into a symbol of the divine presence. Gibran's readers, in turn, found a new way to think about love and spirituality, and many of them traced that feeling back to Rumi. The influence of Rumi did not stop with poets. Modern songwriters have taken his lines and turned them into lyrics. In the 1970s, a folk singer named John Dee wrote a song called "The Light Within," using Rumi's line, "You the wound is the place where the light enters you." The song reached radio stations across the United States and introduced Rumi's thought to listeners who never opened a poetry book. More recently, a pop artist named Maya released a track titled "Dance of the Beloved," where the chorus repeats, "When the soul is ready, the heart opens." Maya's fans often quote the line in social media posts, showing how Rumi's ideas keep moving into new art forms. A teen in a high school class once wrote a text message to a friend. "I feel like Rumi says we are all mirrors for each other." The friend replied, "That's deep. I will put it in my journal." The teen later told a teacher that the line helped her understand a tough friendship. The teacher, Ms. Patel, decided to use a short verse in her English lesson. "Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of the world, or a child, you are welcome." She asked the class to write about a time they felt welcomed by a stranger. The students wrote stories that linked directly to the feeling of open-heartedness that Rumi described. In that classroom, a centuries-old poem became a tool for personal growth. Not everyone agrees that Rumi's influence is as strong as it seems. Some scholars argue that the idea of Rumi as a universal poet is overstated. They point out that many Western writers who claim Rumi's influence actually read only a few translated verses, not the whole body of work. They say that the fame of Rumi in the West grew more from a market for quixotic spirituality than from deep study. Another common criticism is that translation can change meaning. Rumi wrote in Persian, a language full of wordplay and subtle shades. When a translator chooses an English word, the nuance may shift. For example, the Persian word shab means night, but also carries a sense of mystery. A translator might render it simply as night, losing the deeper feeling. Critics claim that because of these changes, the impact of Rumi's ideas in modern works may be based on a version that is not fully his. Supporters of Rumi's influence respond by showing how the core ideas survive translation. They note that even when a line is simplified, the sense of love as a path to truth remains clear. They also point out that many translators work with scholars to keep the original spirit alive. The fact that people from many cultures still feel moved by the verses suggests that something essential travels across language. A key moment that shows the spread of Rumi's work happened in 1861, when a European scholar named Edward G. Brown first laid eyes on a handwritten manuscript of the Masnavi in a dusty library in Istanbul. Brown described the moment in his diary. The ink was still fresh, the curves of the script dancing like wind on water. I felt a quiet fire in my chest as I read the first line. He later carried copies of the manuscript back to England, where he shared them with other scholars. This encounter sparked a wave of academic interest that led to more accurate translations and wider distribution of Rumi's work in Europe. Another story comes from a Persian court in the late 1500s. The ruler, Shah Abbas, liked to hear poetry at his gatherings. One of his favorite verses was, "When the soul is ready, the heart opens." The court poets began to use that line as a motto for the palace, carving it into a marble slab at the entrance of the royal library. Visitors would read the phrase as they entered, reminded that the library was a place for the heart to grow. The phrase later appeared on coins, spreading the idea even further among the people. Modern film also carries echoes of Rumi. In the 2007 movie, The Darjeeling Limited, a character quotes, "The wound is the place where the light enters you," while talking about his own pain. The line is spoken in a quiet scene on a train, and the audience hears the same idea that Rumi once wrote. In the 2010 film Eat, Pray, Love, the main character reads a passage that says, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop." The movie uses the line to illustrate a turning point in the story, showing how a single phrase can shape a character's view of self. These film quotes bring Rumi's thoughts to viewers who may never pick up a poetry book. Rumi's ideas also appear in everyday language. In many Persian families, a parent might say, "When the heart is ready, the door opens," a phrase that directly comes from Rumi's verses. The saying is used to comfort a child who is nervous about a new school. The child hears the phrase and feels a calm sense that the world will welcome them. In English, a similar phrase appears in motivational talks. "When you are ready, the universe opens its doors." The echo of Rumi's line is clear, even when the words are changed. The way Rumi's influence spreads can be compared to a stone dropped in a pond. The first splash is the original poem. The ripples move outward, touching other poets, songwriters, teachers, and even movie makers. Each ripple carries a part of the original shape, but also picks up new colors from the water it passes through. The stone does not move, but the water moves forever. This analogy helps to see how a single voice can keep moving, even as it changes. Some modern thinkers have taken Rumi's ideas and applied them to science and psychology. A psychologist named Dr. Lina Torres writes about the Rumi effect, where people who read verses about love and unity show lower stress levels. She cites a study where participants who read a short Rumi poem for 5 minutes reported feeling calmer than those who read a news article. Dr. Torres says, "The simple act of reading a line that invites the heart to open can shift the brain's response to stress. This shows how a poem written centuries ago can still have a measurable impact on modern life." Another modern interpreter is a digital artist named Amir. He creates short videos that pair Rumi's verses with moving images of nature. One of his most popular clips shows the line, "The garden of the world has no limits except in your mind," while a time-lapse of a sunrise spreads across the screen. Viewers comment that the video makes them think about their own mental limits. Amir says that the visual part helps people see the poem in a new way, proving that Rumi's words can live in many forms. The conversation about Rumi's influence also includes voices that question the depth of his reach. A literary critic named Sarah Kim argues that the popularity of Rumi in the West is partly due to a desire for spiritual shortcuts. She writes, "People pick a line that sounds nice, put it on a mug, and feel they have done something deep." She worries that this reduces the poet's complex teachings to simple slogans. In response, a poet named Jamal Ali points out that even a short line can spark a deeper search. He shares a story of a reader who bought a mug with a Rumi quote, then decided to read the whole Masnavi and changed his career path. The exchange shows that both the surface appeal and the deeper study can coexist. When the influence of a poet stretches across time, it is natural to see both praise and critique. The evidence shows that Rumi's verses have been quoted in classrooms, turned into songs, quoted in movies, and even printed on coins. At the same time, scholars remind us to look at the original language and to be careful about saying that every modern writer owes a debt to Rumi. The balance of these views helps keep the discussion honest. One more anecdote helps to close the picture. In 1995, a young Iranian student named Leila traveled to a university in Paris. In a library, she found a book of Rumi's poems that had been translated by a French scholar. She read the line, "The soul has been given its own ears to hear the music of the universe," and felt a sudden sense of belonging in a foreign city. She later wrote a letter to her professor, saying that the verse gave her courage to speak in class. The professor, hearing this, began to include Rumi's verses in his lectures on comparative literature. This small act shows how a single line can travel from a dusty page to a modern lecture hall, inspiring both student and teacher. Rumi's influence also shows up in the way people talk about love today. A popular dating app includes a feature that shows users a quote each day. One of the quotes is, "Love is the bridge between you and everything." Users often share screenshots of the quote, saying it helped them feel more open to new connections. The app's creators say they chose the line because it is short, hopeful, and easy to understand, yet it carries the depth of Rumi's thought. This example shows that even in technology, Rumi's words find a place. The spread of Rumi's ideas can be seen as a chain of small acts. A scholar translates a verse. A teacher reads it to a class. A teen texts it to a friend. A songwriter puts it to music. A filmmaker includes it in a scene. Each act adds a new link, and the chain grows longer. The chain does not break, even when some links are weaker or when the meaning shifts a bit. The chain's strength comes from the many people who keep passing the words on. In the end, Rumi's influence on later literature and culture is a story of many voices. Poets like Gibran, musicians, teachers, students, scholars, and filmmakers all carry a piece of his work. The arguments that his influence is overstated or that translation changes meaning remind us to stay careful. The anecdotes of a European scholar finding a manuscript and a Persian court carving a phrase into stone remind us that his words have travelled far and wide. Modern film quotes, teen texts, classroom lessons, and songs show that the old verses still speak to new hearts. The calm, steady flow Rumi lived in the city of Konya in the 13th century. He watched the world change around him. War, famine, and disease touched every street. In the midst of that turmoil, he wrote about pain and how it can become a path to growth. His words still speak to people today. The story of his approach to suffering begins with a simple idea. That pain is not only a wound but also a teacher. That idea was not new. Earlier Sufi masters such as Badi-ul-Zaman, known as the Rose of the World, had spoken about the heart's ability to turn grief into love. Badi-ul-Zaman wrote that the soul is like a garden that can bloom after a storm. Rumi took that image and made it his own. Rumi's main argument rests on the belief that the inner self can transform hurt into something useful. He says that when a person feels deep sorrow, the heart opens a door that was closed before. The door lets in a new light. In one of his most famous verses he writes, "So the wound is the place where the light enters you." This line shows how he sees suffering as a doorway rather than a dead end. He does not deny that pain hurts. He simply points out that the feeling can also carry a hidden gift. The gift is the chance to look inside, to see what is true, and to let the self grow. To understand how this works, Rumi often used everyday images. He once compared a broken toy to a wounded heart. A child drops a wooden horse, and the horse cracks. The child can throw it away, or the child can take a piece of glue, press the pieces together, and watch the toy become whole again. The glue does not erase the crack. It makes the crack part of the story of the toy. In the same way, a person who feels hurt can use the experience to become more caring. The crack stays, but it now holds a new kind of strength. The image is easy to see, and it helps people see how pain can be turned into growth. Another simple image appears in the story of a friendship that was broken after an argument. Two friends argued over a small mistake. Words were spoken that cut deep. The friendship seemed lost. One of the friends remembered Rumi's words about the heart's capacity to heal. He decided to write a note, to say sorry, and to offer a small gift. The other friend read the note, felt the sincerity, and the two sat down to talk. The argument faded, and the bond grew stronger. The fight was the crack, the apology was the glue, and the repaired friendship became a living proof of Rumi's teaching. Modern psychologists have found similar ideas in their work. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, teaches people to look at painful thoughts and change the way they see them. A psychologist named Dr. Susan David talks about emotional agility, the skill of moving through feelings without getting stuck. She says that when people accept pain, they can use it to make better choices. This matches Rumi's claim that the wound can let light in. Another researcher, Dr. Brené Brown, studies shame and vulnerability. She writes that sharing a painful story can turn it into a source of connection. Rumi's verses about sharing sorrow with the beloved echo that modern view. The overlap shows that 1,000 years later, the same basic truth still holds. The idea that suffering can be useful does not go unchallenged. One common counterargument says that pain is only a source of damage. It argues that suffering cannot be turned into growth because the damage is real and often leaves lasting scars. This view points to cases where trauma leads to chronic illness, depression, or loss of trust. It says that telling people to find the light can feel like blaming the victim. The argument holds that not all pain can be made into a lesson, and that sometimes the best response is to avoid it altogether. A second counterargument claims that healing is a matter of medicine alone. It says that the body and mind need doctors, medication, and therapy, not poetry or spiritual reflection. From this perspective, the role of a poet is limited to comfort, not cure. The argument points to the success of antibiotics in treating disease, or the role of surgery in repairing a broken bone. It suggests that Rumi's approach may be nice to hear, but it does not replace real medical treatment. Rumi does not deny the need for medicine. In his letters, he praised physicians and thanked them for their skill. He also recognized that the heart needs more than a pill. He wrote, "When the soul is sick, the heart must be the doctor." The line shows that he saw a place for both body care and inner care. He believed that true healing includes the body, the mind, and the spirit. The modern view of holistic health follows that same pattern. Doctors today talk about whole person care, which means treating the physical illness while also supporting mental and emotional well-being. Historical anecdotes illustrate how Rumi put his ideas into action. During a severe plague that struck Konya, many families lost loved ones. The city was filled with fear and grief. Rumi walked among the sick, offering verses that spoke of hope. One night he composed a poem that began, "Even the night that seems darkest holds a hidden sunrise." He shared the poem with a family that had lost a child. The family clutched the words, and they felt a small lift in their sorrow. The poem spread through the city, giving people a sense that even in the deepest loss, a new day could come. The plague eventually faded, but the memory of Rumi's verses stayed. The story shows how a poet's words can act like a gentle balm during a crisis. Another story tells of a widow named Fatima who came to Rumi after her husband died. She sat in his garden, tears on her cheeks, and asked why the world seemed so cruel. Rumi listened, then recited a verse. "Your love was a candle. Its flame may be gone, but the light it gave still warms the room." Fatima felt the truth in those words. She began to help other women in the community, sharing food and comfort. Her grief turned into service. The verse helped her see that the love she had was not lost, but transformed into a new kind of light. The anecdote shows how a single line can help a person move from pain to purpose. Rumi's teachings also appear in modern coping strategies. Many people use mindfulness, a practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment. Mindfulness can be seen as a modern version of Rumi's call to sit with pain and watch it pass. When a person feels anxious, they might sit, breathe, and notice the feeling as a cloud that will move. Rumi's words, sit still, close your eyes, and let the heart be still, echo that practice. Another strategy is expressive writing. People write about their hardest experiences, and the act of putting words on paper helps them see the event from a new angle. Rumi's poetry itself is a form of expressive writing that turns inner turmoil into beautiful lines. By reading his verses, modern readers practice a similar transformation. Rumi's influence has also reached the field of positive psychology. This branch of psychology looks at what makes life worth living. Researchers such as Martin Seligman talk about post-traumatic growth, the idea that people can grow stronger after a crisis. The concept matches Rumi's belief that the wound can let light in. In a study of survivors of natural disasters, participants who reported finding meaning in their suffering also showed higher levels of happiness later on. The findings give scientific support to the ancient claim that pain can be a stepping stone to growth. Even in popular culture, Rumi's ideas appear. A recent best-selling self-help book quotes his line, "The garden of the heart blooms after the rain." The author uses the line to illustrate how hardship can lead to personal development. In a popular song, the lyric from Broken Glass, "We build a new view" mirrors Rumi's broken toy analogy. These modern echoes show that his message still resonates. To bring the ideas home, consider a child who drops a favorite toy car. The car cracks, and the child feels upset. The parent offers glue and shows how to fix it. The child watches the pieces come together, and the car looks whole again. The child learns that something broken can be repaired, and that the effort of fixing brings a sense of pride. The same pattern can happen inside a person. When a person feels hurt, they can choose to sit with the feeling, to understand it, and then to rebuild a stronger sense of self. Think of two friends who argue over a small mistake. The argument leaves a gap between them. One friend remembers a line from Rumi about the heart's capacity to heal. The friend writes a note, offers an apology, and invites the other to share a cup of tea. The other friend reads the note, feels the sincerity, and accepts the invitation. The two talk, the gap closes, and their bond becomes deeper. The story shows how a simple act of acknowledging pain can turn a conflict into a chance for growth. Rumi's own life offers a living example. When his close friend and mentor, Shams of Tabriz, disappeared under mysterious circumstances, Rumi felt a deep loss. He could have turned bitter, but instead he poured his grief into poetry. The verses that followed are among his most moving. He wrote, "The night is dark, yet the stars shine brighter. The loss became a source of creative fire, showing how personal suffering can fuel artistic growth. Critics may still argue that not all pain can be turned into a lesson. They point to cases of severe abuse where the damage feels permanent. They say that telling someone to find the light can feel dismissive." Rumi's own words can help answer this concern. He wrote, "Do not be afraid of the darkness. It is only the absence of light, not the enemy." The line invites a gentle look at the darkness, not a forced optimism. It suggests that the darkness is a space where light can later appear, not a foe that must be fought. Another criticism is that healing needs only medical help. Modern healthcare indeed saves lives. Yet Rumi's view does not replace doctors. He saw the physician as a partner with the soul. He said, "The healer of the body and the healer of the heart must walk together." This view aligns with today's integrated care models, where doctors, therapists, and spiritual counselors work side by side. The model respects both the physical and the inner parts of a person. In the present day, coping with stress often includes techniques that echo Rumi's approach. A person facing a job loss may feel hopeless. Instead of only looking for a new job, the person might sit with the feeling, write about the loss, and read a verse that reminds them that every ending is a new beginning. The person may then decide to learn a new skill, turning the loss into an opportunity. The process mirrors the broken toy being glued back together, and the new skill becomes the fresh paint on the repaired toy. Similarly, a couple going through a rough patch might recall Rumi's line, "When the heart is broken, the world becomes a garden of thorns." By recognizing the pain, they can choose to tend the garden together, removing the thorns and planting new flowers of understanding. The act of working through the hurt can make their relationship stronger, just as the repaired friendship grew after the fight. Rumi's teachings also speak to the way societies handle collective trauma. After natural disasters, communities often gather to share stories, sing, and remember those lost. This communal sharing is a form of the same process Rumi described for the individual. The shared verses become a way to turn collective sorrow into a shared hope. In recent years, after a major earthquake, volunteers in a city organized a night of poetry reading. The poems included Rumi's lines about light entering wounds. The event helped many people feel less alone in their grief. The modern psychologist Carl Rogers talked about unconditional positive regard, the idea that a person feels safe when they are accepted without judgment. This concept aligns with Rumi's view that the heart can open when it feels safe. Rumi's verses often speak of the beloved's acceptance, a metaphor for the divine, but also for any caring person. When a person feels that acceptance, they can let the wound be seen and then begin to heal. In the field of education, teachers sometimes use stories like Rumi to help students deal with failure. When a student receives a low grade, the teacher might share a verse that says, "The seed that fails to sprout today will grow stronger tomorrow." The student can see the setback as a chance to. Rumi's verses have lived on for centuries, and they still speak to people who wash dishes, tend fields, write reports, or sit in quiet rooms. The poet lived in the 13th century in Konya, a city that was a hub of trade and learning. He wrote in Persian, but his words travel across language and time. In his famous collection, the Masnavi, he writes, "When you are with everyone, you belong to none. When you are alone, you belong to yourself." That line can be a reminder for anyone who feels lost in a crowd or in a busy schedule. Mullah Sadra, a Persian philosopher who lived a few hundred years after Rumi, wrote about the link between the soul and daily work. He said that the heart is a garden, and each action plants a seed. Sadra's view fits well with Rumi's idea that love is the soil that makes every act grow. When a farmer puts a seed in the earth, he may think only of the crop, but Rumi's line, "The garden of the world has no limits, except in your mind," shows that the farmer can also see each seed as a small act of love. A farmer in a small village can use Rumi's guidance while planting. In the early morning, the farmer walks to the field, feeling the cool dew on his boots. He remembers the verse, "Raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder." He thinks of his tools as extensions of his breath, not as loud machines. He places each seed gently, as if he were placing a promise. The rhythm of planting becomes a prayer. The farmer can also recall Sadra's advice that the heart must be steady like a well-watered garden. By staying calm, the farmer avoids rushing, and the seeds settle deeper into the soil. The result is a healthier crop and a mind that feels less hurried. A student studying for a test can find the same calm in Rumi's words. The student opens a book, sees the line, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." He sees his anxiety as a chance to learn, not as a block. The student breaks the study session into short periods, each like a breath. He remembers the verse, "When you do something, do it with all your heart." That reminder helps him focus on one problem at a time, rather than being overwhelmed by the whole exam. Mullah Sadra's idea that the soul grows with each thoughtful act gives the student a sense that each page turned is a step toward a fuller self. Some people argue that poetry belongs only to scholars, that the language is too lofty for everyday use. They claim that a farmer or a factory worker would not understand a mystic's verses. Yet history shows otherwise. In the 14th century, a baker named Hassan would chant a line while kneading dough. "The dough of love rises when it is left to breathe." Hassan said that the rhythm of his chant helped his hands move smoothly, and the bread turned out lighter. The baker's story proves that a simple verse can guide a hand and calm a mind. Another argument says that daily life is too busy for reflection. People feel that they have no time to pause and think about verses. A caravan leader named Farid, who guided traders across the desert, faced this claim. When a sandstorm threatened the group, Farid gathered the travelers, took a deep breath, and recited, "The universe is a mirror. What you see in it is what you bring to it." He asked each traveler to think of a calm thought. The caravan slowed, the travelers breathed together, and the storm passed with less panic. Farid's use of Rumi's line showed that a short pause can change the whole atmosphere, even in a hectic journey. Modern productivity tips often speak of mindful breaks, single task focus, and intentional routines. Those ideas echo Rumi's guidance. For example, the popular method of Pomodoro suggests working for 25 minutes, then taking a 5-minute break. During that break, one could read a short verse, such as, "The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep." The verse invites the mind to stay awake to small wonders, turning a break into a moment of insight. Another modern tip is the practice of daily reflection, where a person writes down 3 things that went well. Rumi's line, "What you seek is seeking you," can be a prompt for that reflection. It reminds the writer that effort and desire are linked. If a student writes, "Who understood the math problem," the verse suggests that the student's focus helped the answer appear. This creates a loop of confidence, similar to Sadra's belief that the heart's steadiness brings growth. Analogies help bring the ideas home. Think of a garden hose. If the water is turned on full blast, the pressure can damage the plants. If the flow is steady and gentle, the plants drink well. Rumi's verses act like a gentle flow, guiding actions without forcing them. Mullah Sadra's garden analogy shows that the heart must be watered regularly, not flooded. A second analogy compares a clock to a poem. A clock ticks in a fixed pattern, marking time. A poem marks moments of feeling, giving each tick a meaning. When a baker kneads dough while humming a line, the rhythm of the poem becomes the clock for his work. The dough rises not just because of yeast, but because the baker's heart is in sync with the verse. Historical anecdotes add depth. In the 16th century, a Sufi master named Shahabuddin visited a market where a potter was shaping clay. The master whispered, "The shape of the cup is the shape of the heart." The potter smiled, felt a calm surge, and his hands moved smoother. The cup that day was praised for its perfect balance. This story shows how a short verse can change a craft. Another anecdote comes from the Ottoman era, when a soldier named Yusuf stood guard at a city gate. He felt fear as a rival army approached. He remembered Rumi's line, "The night is dark, but the moon is brighter for those who look up." Yusuf lifted his eyes, felt steadier, and held his post without trembling. His calm helped the city stay safe. The verse turned fear into focus. Rumi's guidance also fits into rest. After a long day, a person can sit on a porch and read, "When you let go of what you think you are, you become what you might be." That line invites a gentle letting go of tasks, allowing the mind to drift into a peaceful state. Modern sleep advice often suggests a cooled-down routine. Adding a short verse to that routine can signal the brain that it is time to rest, much like a lighthouse signals a ship to dock. Critics who say poetry is only for scholars may point to the language of Rumi as too ornate. Yet translations exist that keep the meaning simple. For instance, the line, "Your task is not to seek love, but merely to seek and find the place where love dwells," can be read in a few seconds. A farmer can read it while checking the irrigation system, and the thought stays with him as he works. The verse does not demand a library, it fits in a pocket. Those who claim daily life is too busy can look at the caravan leader's story again. The leader did not stop the journey. He only paused for a breath and a line. The pause lasted less than a minute, yet it changed the mood of the whole group. In the same way, a worker can read a line during a coffee break, and the short moment can reset the mind for the next task. Modern scholars still study Rumi's influence on productivity. Dr. Layla Karim, a psychologist at a university, writes that the rhythmic quality of Rumi's poetry can lower cortisol, the stress hormone, when read aloud. She cites a study where participants who read a short verse before a task performed better on memory tests. This research ties the ancient verses to modern science. Mullah Sadra's philosophical system, called transcendent theosophy, also supports the idea that the soul grows through everyday acts. He argued that the mind is not separate from the body, but that each action shapes the inner self. When a student studies, each page turned is a step toward a larger inner garden. When a baker kneads dough, each fold is a step toward a larger inner calm. Sadra's view gives a framework that links Rumi's poetic advice to daily habits. Practical steps can be drawn from the verses. First, pick a short line that feels personal. Second, repeat it at a natural break. When the kettle whistles, when a seed is placed, when a page is turned. Third, let the line guide the next action. Move as the river moves, smooth and steady. Fourth, note any change in feeling. Over time, the habit builds a quiet inner voice that supports focus. An example of a farmer using the steps. He chooses the line. The seed does not know the earth, but it trusts the soil. At sunrise, he says it aloud as he walks to the field. He plants, feeling trust in each seed. By midday, he notices less worry about weeds, because the line reminds him that each seed has a purpose. The crop grows strong, and the farmer feels a quiet pride. An example of a student using the steps. He selects, "The lamp of the heart shines brighter than any candle." Before opening his textbook, he reads the line. He studies a chapter, feeling a gentle focus. When a difficult problem appears, he recalls the line, reminding himself that inner light can solve the puzzle. After the study session, he writes a short note about how the verse helped. He finds that his stress drops and his recall improves. Rumi's verses also speak to the idea of balance between work and rest. He wrote, "When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full of flowers." The image of a soul lying down suggests a moment of pause that is full of beauty. Modern advice on micro breaks recommends standing up, stretching, or looking out a window for a few seconds. Adding a verse to that micro break can turn a simple stretch into a moment of meaning. In the world of technology, a programmer can read, "Code is a mirror of the heart. Write with love, not with fear." The line reminds the coder that each line of code is an expression, not just a task. By pausing to read the verse, the programmer may avoid rushed bugs and feel more satisfied with the work. This shows how Rumi's guidance stretches across fields, from soil to silicon. The baker's anecdote shows how a verse can be part of a rhythm. Hassan, the baker, would hum, "The dough of love rises when it is left to breathe," while his hands folded the dough. The rhythm of the words matched the rhythm of his motions. The loaf that came out was lighter, and the customers felt a subtle calm when they ate it. The story illustrates that a simple line can become a tool for better work. The caravan leader's anecdote shows how a verse can calm a group. Farid, the leader, faced a sandstorm that threatened the travelers. He gathered them, took a breath, and said, "The universe is a mirror. What you see in it is what you bring to it." The travelers closed their eyes, thought of calm images, and the storm's roar seemed less harsh. The group arrived safely. This shows that a short verse can change the mood of many people at once. Rumi's guidance also fits into the idea of gratitude. He wrote, "Wear gratitude like a cloak, and it will feed your heart." A worker can wear that thought like a coat while cleaning a room. The simple act of noting gratitude for a clean space can turn a chore into a moment of thanks. Over time, the habit builds a sense of abundance rather than lack. Mullah Sadra's view of the heart as a garden also supports gratitude. He said that the heart gathers the seeds of deeds, and each good deed is a flower. When a student thanks a teacher, that thank you is a seed that grows into confidence. When a farmer thanks the rain, that thank you is a seed that grows into patience. The combination of Rumi's verses and Sadra's garden image gives a clear picture of how daily acts become spiritual growth. Modern productivity tools often use checklists. Adding to the conversation about Rumi has grown far beyond the quiet rooms where his verses were first whispered. In cafes, on social media, and in university halls, people repeat his lines, change them, and sometimes argue about their true meaning. This part of the video looks at the most common misunderstandings and the scholarly critiques that try to set the record straight. It also shows how a simple meme or a teacher's slip can turn a line into something quite different from what Rumi meant. The segment ends with two real stories, a look at other mystic poets, and a reminder that criticism can be both helpful and risky. One of the biggest misunderstandings is to read Rumi as a simple love poet. A popular meme shows a picture of a cat with the caption, "Rumi said, 'Love is a cat that sleeps on your keyboard.'" The quote is not in any of Rumi's books. The meme mixes a modern joke with a line that sounds like Rumi, but the original words are missing. The meme spreads fast because it feels cute and easy to share. Yet the real Rumi wrote about love as a fire that burns the self, not a cat that naps on a laptop. This shows how a short, funny image can replace a deep idea with a shallow joke. A second, everyday mistake happens in classrooms. A high school teacher once read the line, "The wound is the place where the light enters you, or the light enters you," as "wound is the place where the light leaves you." The teacher thought the word enters was a typo and changed it to leaves. The students wrote essays about how pain pushes light away, instead of how pain can bring new insight. The teacher's misreading changed the lesson from a hopeful view of suffering to a bleak one. The error was not intentional, but it shows how easy it is to twist Rumi's meaning when the text is not checked carefully. Scholars have long warned against these shortcuts. Henry Corbin, a French philosopher who studied Persian mysticism, wrote that Rumi's poetry is a mirror that reflects the inner world of the seeker. Corbin said that each line works on many levels and that taking a line at face value loses the depth. He also noted that translations often flatten the subtle play of words. Corbin's work reminds readers that Rumi's verses are meant to be lived, not just posted on a screen. Modern skeptics raise another set of concerns. Some writers argue that Rumi's fame is built on a modern market that wants easy spirituality. They point out that many publishers choose the most marketable verses and leave out the harsher parts where Rumi warns about ego and false desire. One skeptic, a cultural critic named Sarah Patel, wrote that Rumi has become a brand, not a teacher. Patel says that the brand hides the parts of Rumi that challenge power and comfort. She asks readers to ask who chose which verses to publish. Two common counter-arguments appear in the debate. The first says that any criticism of Rumi weakens his value. Supporters claim that his words are a gift, and that pointing out errors or biases is like pulling a thread from a beautiful cloth. They worry that criticism will make people stop reading him. The second counterargument says that all criticism is biased. It claims that every reader brings their own agenda, so no critique can be truly neutral. Both sides use strong language, but they also hide the fact that criticism can help the work stay alive and clear. A real story about a publishing error shows how a small mistake can change a whole verse. In 1998, a Western publisher released a collection of Rumi's poems. The printer mixed up two Persian words that looked similar. The line that originally read, "The reed flute is empty, it longs for the wind," became, "The reed flute is full, it longs for the wind." The change from empty to full altered the symbolism. In Sufi thought, the empty reed represents the soul's longing for the divine. The error made the poem sound like a satisfied instrument, not a yearning one. Readers who bought that edition argued that the meaning was wrong, and later editions corrected the mistake. The incident shows how a tiny slip can shift a spiritual image. Another anecdote comes from a university symposium in 2015. Scholars gathered to discuss the relevance of Rumi in modern ethics. One professor, Dr. Luis Ortega, argued that Rumi's focus on love makes his work timeless. A second scholar, Aisha Karim, challenged that view, saying that love alone cannot solve social injustice. The debate grew heated when a graduate student quoted a line, "If you are a lover, be a lover of all," and claimed it meant that Rumi supports universal tolerance. Dr. Karim replied that the line must be read in its original context, where Rumi was speaking about the lover's relationship to the divine, not to every human system. The audience left with a sense that Rumi's words can be read in many ways, and that careful study matters. Comparing Rumi with other mystic poets helps to see where the misunderstandings come from. Hafiz, another Persian poet, also wrote about love and wine, but his verses often celebrate the joy of the present moment without the same focus on the inner journey. Kabir, a North Indian mystic, used simple language to criticize religious rituals. St. John of the Cross, a Christian mystic, wrote about the dark night of the soul, a concept similar to Rumi's idea of spiritual pain. Each poet has a distinct style, yet modern readers often lump them together as spiritual quotes. This lumping can erase the unique teachings each one offers. Primary sources give a clear picture of what Rumi actually wrote. In the Masnavi he says, "When you let go of yourself, you become a vessel for the light." This line speaks about self-emptiness, not about losing identity for the sake of comfort. In a letter to a disciple, Rumi wrote, "Do not be satisfied with stories how they were told. Seek the truth behind the words." This advice warns readers against taking verses at face value. When these original lines are quoted, the depth becomes visible. The modern world often prefers short, catchy versions of these lines. A tweet may read, Rumi, "The wound is the place where the light enters." The tweet leaves out the next line, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." The missing part reminds the reader that the light is not a distant force, but something that works inside the person. When the second part is omitted, the quote feels more like a slogan than a guide for inner work. Another everyday mistake appears in a popular self-help book. The author cites Rumi as saying, "Your heart is a garden, plant only roses." The real verse says, "Your heart is a garden, plant whatever you love." The change from whatever you love to only roses adds a moral judgment that was not in the original. The book's readers may think Rumi taught a narrow view of love, while the true line invites a broader, more personal choice. The criticism from scholars like Corbin and skeptics like Patel is not meant to dismiss Rumi. It is meant to protect the work from becoming a shallow brand. They ask readers to look at the original Persian, to note the rhythm, the wordplay, and the spiritual context. They also ask translators to be honest about the limits of language. When translations are honest, the reader can feel the tension between the literal meaning and the poetic feeling. One defense against criticism says that Rumi's value lies in the feeling his verses give. It argues that whether a line is perfect or not, the feeling it sparks is what matters. This view can be helpful for people who need comfort. Yet it also risks turning a living tradition into a set of feel-good slogans. The other defense says that all criticism is colored by the critic's own background. It reminds readers that a Western scholar may miss the Persian cultural clues, while a Persian reader may be blind to universal themes. Both defenses have truth, but they also hide the fact that careful, balanced critique can improve understanding. The publisher's error and the university debate show that criticism can happen in many places. A printer's typo is a form of accidental criticism, because it forces readers to question what they read. A scholarly debate is a deliberate form of criticism, aiming to sharpen ideas. Both are part of the life of Rumi's work. They remind the audience that a text does not stay still. It moves as people read, share, and argue about it. When the audience thinks about Rumi, they may recall the famous line, "What you seek is seeking you." That line is often used in motivational posts. The original context, however, is a dialogue between a seeker and the divine, where the seeker is invited to let go of ego. The line is not a guarantee that any desire will be met, but an invitation to align one's heart with a higher purpose. Understanding the original setting prevents the line from becoming a simple law of attraction slogan. In comparing Rumi with Hafiz, one sees that Hafiz often celebrates wine as a symbol of divine joy, while Rumi uses wine to talk about the intoxicating presence of God. A reader who mixes the two may think that both poets encourage literal drinking, which is not their aim. The same can happen with Kabir, whose verses about the false god are sometimes turned into political slogans about secularism. These mix-ups show how easy it is to lose nuance. The final part of the segment asks the viewer to pause before sharing a quote. Ask, is this the exact wording? Does the line belong to Rumi or to another poet? What is the surrounding verse? By asking these questions, the viewer joins the long line of seekers who treat Rumi's work with respect. The viewer also learns that criticism, when done kindly, can keep the poetry alive and true. In the end, the story of Rumi's critiques and misinterpretations is a reminder that great poetry lives in the space between the writer and the reader. It is a space that can be filled with memes, errors, and debates. It can also be filled with careful study, honest translation, and open dialogue. The balance between love for the verses and willingness to question them keeps Rumi's voice fresh for each new generation. Rumi's verses have traveled across centuries, yet they still whisper to a mind that is busy with emails, traffic, and screens. In the earlier part of the video, the story of Rumi's meeting with Shams of Tabriz was told, and the way that love became a path to truth was explored. Now the focus shifts to the question of how a reader can bring that same love into a modern-day life. The thread that runs from the old Persian court to a present-day office is the idea that the heart can be a guide, even when the world feels fast and noisy. By looking at the work of other teachers, by seeing real people try small practices, and by hearing both support and doubt, the viewer can see a clear map for living Rumi's wisdom today. The origins of Rumi's thought lie in the Sufi tradition of the 13th century. Sufism is a branch of Islam that seeks a direct, personal experience of the divine. In the Persian language of his time, Rumi used the word love, not as a romance, but as a force that pulls the soul toward the source of all being. A famous line from his poem reads, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." That line tells a simple truth. Pain can open a path for growth. The same idea appears in the work of Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Zen monk who taught that suffering can become a doorway to mindfulness. Thich Nhat Hanh often said, "When we are aware of the present moment, we are no longer trapped by the past or the future." Both teachers point to a practice of turning toward what hurts rather than running away. The first argument for applying Rumi's ideas today rests on the fact that the human heart has not changed. Whether in a caravan crossing a desert or in a commuter train, people still feel longing, fear, joy, and loss. Rumi's verses give a language for those feelings. When a person says, "I am lost in the crowd," a line from Rumi can answer, "The garden of the world has no limits except in your mind." The second argument comes from science. Modern research on mindfulness shows that paying attention to breath, body, and feeling can lower stress hormones. Rumi's call to listen with the heart matches the scientific finding that a calm heart can improve health. By linking the old poetry to modern data, the case for relevance becomes stronger. Not everyone agrees that ancient verses can help a person who must answer a phone call every 5 minutes. One counterargument says that old wisdom belongs to a time when life was slower, when people could sit under a tree for hours. Critics point out that the modern workplace demands quick decisions, not long contemplation. They ask, how can a poem about the lover's soul help a manager meet a deadline? A second counterargument claims that Rumi's language is too mystical to be practical. It suggests that talking about the beloved is vague and does not give concrete steps for daily tasks. These doubts are not ignored. They are answered by showing how a short practice can fit into a busy schedule, and how a simple metaphor can become a tool for focus. A practical example begins with a person who chooses to meditate for 5 minutes before work. The person sits at a kitchen table, closes eyes, and repeats a line from Rumi. When you are with everyone, you belong to no one. The breath comes in, the breath goes out, and the mind steadies. In those few minutes, the person feels a shift from the rush of the alarm to a calm center. The practice does not require a special room or a long chant. It only needs a moment and a line that reminds the heart to be present. By the time the coffee is poured, the person carries a quiet confidence into the office, ready to answer emails with less anxiety. A second example shows a family gathered for dinner, each person taking a turn to read a short poem by Rumi. The children listen, the parents smile, and the words become a shared experience. One line says, "Raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder." The family learns that gentle speech can calm a heated conversation. The poem becomes a tool for teaching kindness, for turning a simple meal into a moment of growth. The act of sharing poetry also builds a habit of reflection, because the next day the child may think of the line while doing homework, and the parent may recall it while dealing with a traffic jam. To bring the ideas even closer to everyday life, an analogy can be used. Think of the mind as a garden. When weeds grow unchecked, the garden looks messy and the plants cannot get enough sunlight. Rumi's verses act like a gardener's hand, pulling out the weeds of anger and fear and planting seeds of love and patience. The garden then yields fruit that can be shared. A second analogy compares the heart to a compass. In a city of tall buildings, a compass still points north. Rumi's words point toward the inner north, the direction that leads to peace, even when the streets are crowded and confusing. Historical anecdotes give life to the abstract ideas. One story tells of a group of poets in 14th century Konya who would meet after sunset in a small garden. They would read Rumi's verses aloud, then sit in silence, letting the words settle like dew on leaves. That practice created a community that survived wars and famine, because each member carried the calm of the garden inside. Another anecdote comes from the early 20th century, when a Persian teacher named Hafiz Ahmadi organized a school where children learned math and reading alongside poetry. He believed that the heart needed nourishment as much as the mind. The school students grew up with high scores and a reputation for kindness, showing that Rumi's teachings can be woven into education. Modern stories illustrate how the same verses can inspire new ventures. In a small town, a community garden was started after a local resident read a line from Rumi that says, "The garden of the world has no limits except in your mind." The resident gathered neighbors, cleared a vacant lot, and planted vegetables. The garden became a place where people met, shared stories, and helped each other. The garden's success showed that a simple poem can spark collective action. In the tech world, a startup called Hardcode chose Rumi's line, "What you seek is seeking you," as its motto. The founders printed the quote on their office walls and used it during product brainstorming. They said the quote reminded them that the right idea would come when the team was calm and open. The company's culture grew to value patience and listening, and their product won an award for user-friendly design. Both anecdotes show that Rumi's verses can move from a page to a real impact on people's lives. Modern interpretations of Rumi's work often blend his mystic language with contemporary psychology. Some therapists use his poetry as a prompt for clients to explore feelings of attachment. A therapist might ask, "What does the line, 'You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the ocean,' mean to you?" The client may discover a sense of belonging that eases anxiety. Others apply the idea of fourth dance of the lovers to describe the relationship between self-care and work. In this view, the dance is a balance, not a competition. By seeing life as a dance, a person can move fluidly between tasks instead of feeling torn. When the viewer thinks about these ideas, a link back to the earlier part of the video becomes clear. The story of Rumi's love for Shams taught that a meeting can change a life. The same principle works today when a person meets a line of poetry at breakfast. The earlier discussion of the whirling dervish showed how movement can be a prayer. The modern examples of meditation and family poem sharing show that movement and stillness can both be prayers, just as they were for the dervishes. The thread that ties everything together is the notion that love, in Rumi's sense, is a practice that can be done in small steps. To help viewers start, a simple plan can be offered. First, pick a short line from Rumi that feels personal. Second, set a tiny habit. Read the line aloud each morning, or write it on a sticky note for the bathroom mirror. Third, notice moments during the day when the line seems to answer a feeling. Fourth, share the line with someone else, perhaps at dinner or in a text. Fifth, reflect each week on how the line changed a reaction or a thought. This plan does not require a big change, only a tiny shift of attention. Some may still wonder whether these steps are enough. The first objection is that a line of poetry cannot fix a broken system, such as a stressful workplace or an unfair society. The response is that personal calm can ripple outward. When one person chooses to speak gently, others may follow. Over time, small ripples can become a wave of cultural change. The second objection is that the language of love feels vague in a world that values data. The answer is that love can be measured in outcomes: lower blood pressure, better relationships, higher creativity. Rumi's words give a language for those outcomes, turning feelings into a guide for action. A final story ties the whole theme together. In 2021, a group of volunteers in a city park organized a poetry walk. They placed printed verses of Rumi on benches along a path. People walking their dogs or jogging stopped, read the lines, and often smiled. One runner said, "I was late for a meeting, but that line reminded me to breathe." Another mother told her child, "The garden of the world has no limits," and they both felt a pause in the rush. The walk became a weekly event, showing that even a short line can create a shared pause in a bustling city. In sum, Rumi's wisdom can be lived today by turning his verses into tiny habits, by seeing them as tools for the heart, and by sharing them with others. The teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh reinforce the same idea, that mindfulness and love are simple practices that anyone can try. By looking at the examples of a person meditating before work, a family sharing a poem at dinner, a community garden, and a tech startup, the viewer can see many ways to bring the old verses into modern life. The counter-arguments remind that relevance must be tested, and the anecdotes show that the test has already been passed in many places. The story of Rumi's love, the story of Shams, the story of the whirling dervishes, and the story of today's quiet moments all point to one truth: the heart can be a guide, no matter the century. By listening to that guide, each viewer can let a line of poetry become a small lamp that lights the path through a busy day.